When a reporter challenges her beliefs, Karoline's response will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about authenticity. The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation as camera crews adjusted their lenses. Karoline sat across from the reporter, her posture straight, her presence radiating quiet strength. Michael, a seasoned journalist known for his sharp questioning, was prepared for what he thought would be a routine interview. He had done his research. Karoline was known for her unwavering faith, the kind that shaped her entire life. But today he wanted to test its limits, to find the cracks, if any existed. The overhead lights hummed as the cameras rolled. "So, Karoline," Michael began, his tone smooth, calculated. "You often speak about your faith, about how it's the foundation of your life. But today, I noticed something interesting. No cross, no visible symbols. Isn't faith supposed to be seen?" The words landed like a challenge, but Karoline remained steady. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, her gaze unwavering. A brief silence filled the space, but she did not rush to respond. Michael's expression hinted at expectation, perhaps a flicker of insecurity, a defensive reaction. He had seen it before, but not in Karoline. Her faith wasn't something she wore for display. It wasn't a badge, an ornament, or a symbol to convince others of her beliefs. Faith to her was deeply personal, embedded in her actions, her thoughts, and most importantly, in how she treated others. It did not require external validation, but Michael had made an assumption that without a visible sign, her faith was somehow less real. Still, Karoline did not waver. She had faced questions meant to provoke before, but this one felt different. This wasn't about her. It was about something deeper. Michael leaned forward, pressing further. "It's just curious," he said with a smirk. "You preach about the importance of faith, but without the symbols, without an outward sign, how do we know it's not just a facade?" The accusation hung in the air. Karoline knew what he was doing, probing for a weakness, hoping for a reaction. But she wouldn't give him one. Her faith wasn't for him, it wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't a performance. Silence stretched between them, making him uncomfortable. Michael shifted in his seat, expecting her to defend herself. Instead, she remained calm, collected, unshaken. Finally, he pushed again. "The world has seen enough of people who claim one thing and do another. How do we know you're not just another example of that?" Karoline adjusted her posture slightly, as if preparing for a response that required more than just words. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, deliberate. "I don't wear my faith to prove anything to anyone," she said. And in that moment, Michael realized faith wasn't something meant to be seen. It was something meant to be lived. When a reporter questions her beliefs, Karoline's response will challenge everything you thought you knew about authenticity. The air in the studio was thick with tension. Camera crews adjusted their lenses, the overhead lights casting a sharp glow over the room. Karoline sat poised, unwavering, across from Michael, the seasoned journalist known for his relentless questioning. Michael had done his homework. Karoline was known for her unshakable faith, the kind that defined her life. But today he was looking for cracks. He wanted to see if she could be rattled, if her confidence was just a mask. The cameras rolled. Michael leaned in, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You talk a lot about faith, Karoline, about how it's the foundation of your life. But today I noticed something. No cross, no visible symbols. Isn't faith supposed to be seen?" The question hung in the air, deliberate, almost taunting. Karoline didn't flinch. Her hands remained still in her lap, her expression calm. "My actions speak louder than any cross," she said, her voice steady. "Louder than any title or symbol I could wear." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. Michael wasn't ready to back down. He was still searching for a flaw, a moment where she might slip. "Actions, huh?" He tilted his head, his tone turning sharp. "What about the times when those actions seem more about you than your faith? When people can't tell the difference between what's done for attention and what's done out of true belief? Doesn't that bother you?" a subtle shift in the air. Caroline's expression remained unchanged, but the quiet strength in her eyes deepened. She wasn't angry, but something flickered within her, a spark of clarity as if she was finally allowing him to see something deeper. "Faith isn't about what others think of me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's about the work I do, the good I bring into the world. If you're looking for a show, you won't find one here. I don't answer to the crowd, and I don't need validation from anyone." Michael leaned forward, his smirk returning. "So you're saying it's just about you and the good you do? And everyone else is just supposed to figure it out for themselves?" Caroline's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close. "No," she said softly. "I'm saying it's about making a difference even if no one ever sees it. It's about staying true to what I believe, regardless of whether people understand it or not." A flicker of something crossed Michael's face. Doubt, perhaps. Or realization. He had expected an easier target, someone who would be rattled, caught off guard. Instead, he was faced with unwavering conviction, and that more than anything unsettled him. "I see," he muttered, shifting in his chair, trying to regain control of the conversation. He cleared his throat. "But you know, Karoline, the world isn't just about personal beliefs. What if the world judges you? What if they don't see the good you claim to do?" Silence. And then, for the first time, Karoline leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, but it cut through the tension like a blade. "If the world judges me, Michael," she said, each word deliberate, "then that's their choice. But I won't change who I am to fit their standards. That's the essence of faith, isn't it? Not changing who you are to fit in, but staying true to what you know is right." Michael's eyes flickered. For the first time in the interview, he seemed to falter. He had expected resistance. He had expected defensiveness. What he hadn't expected was this quiet, unshakable certainty that made his own assumptions feel small. But Karoline wasn't done. She let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of her words to settle. She glanced away for a moment, her eyes landing on a framed picture on the studio wall. A quiet landscape, a town she had once visited on a retreat. A place where life was simple, where people lived without chasing validation. That memory reminded her why she was here. Not to prove anything, not to perform, but to stand firm in what she believed. She turned back to Michael, her gaze steady, and in that moment he realized faith wasn't something meant to be seen. It was something meant to be lived. Karoline let out a slow breath, feeling the tension in her chest begin to ease. Her response had been calm, measured. But now, as she sat in the silence that followed, she realized something. This moment wasn't just about defending her faith. It was a reflection of how far she had come in her own journey. Faith wasn't an accessory. It wasn't a badge to be displayed for approval. It was the way she lived, the way she treated people, the way she chose to respond to the world around her. The weight of the moment settled over the studio. Michael, the sharp-witted reporter known for pushing his guests to the brink, had fallen silent. For the first time in the interview, he seemed unsure of how to continue. He had pressed, prodded, even mocked. But Karoline hadn't met his fire with fire. Instead, she had countered with something far stronger, an unwavering, quiet conviction. And that was something he hadn't prepared for. She had expected his questions to challenge her. But instead, they had only reinforced what she already knew to be true. This wasn't just about faith. It was about authenticity. It was about standing firm in who you are, no matter how the world tries to shape you. Karoline had learned long ago that the most powerful responses weren't always the loudest. They were the ones that didn't seek to be heard, yet couldn't be ignored. The room was still, yet charged with an unspoken energy. Michael's eyes flickered, scanning her, searching for a weak spot. His mind was racing, desperate for a way to regain control. But for Karoline, this wasn't a battle of words anymore. It was about something much deeper. Sensing the weight of the silence, Michael finally leaned forward, his voice carrying just a bit more force. "So, you really think the world should just accept that?" he asked. That faith is something that doesn't need to be seen. That people don't need to understand why you believe what you do? He let the question linger, his eyes narrowing. Isn't it a little hypocritical to talk about faith without showing it in the way people expect? Karoline let the words settle. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't offended. She was simply certain, and that certainty carried its own kind of power. Her eyes met his, steady and unshaken. "Michael," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Faith is not a performance." She paused, letting the words take root. "It's not a spectacle to be applauded. It's not something I wear like a costume or display for approval. Faith is something that lives in the heart, in the choices I make, in the way I treat others, in the quiet moments when no one is watching." She leaned back slightly, her tone unwavering. "If someone can't see it because I'm not wearing a symbol, because I'm not putting on a show, then that's not my problem." A beat of silence. Her gaze never wavered. "That's between them, and what they believe faith is supposed to look like." The words hit Michael harder than he expected. For the first time, he felt something shift. Not just in the conversation, but in himself. This woman wasn't here to convince him. She wasn't here to win an argument or defend herself. She was simply stating what she knew to be true, and the sheer clarity in her voice made it difficult to push back. Karoline saw it, the flicker of hesitation in his expression, the brief moment of uncertainty. "So," she continued, "people spend so much time measuring the faith of others," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "They treat it like something to be weighed, judged, evaluated, based on how loudly it's proclaimed or what symbols a person wears." She shook her head slightly. "But that's not faith." Michael swallowed but said nothing. "Faith is holding on to something in the quiet moments when no one is watching, when no one is applauding. It's in kindness when it's easier to be cruel. It's in forgiveness when resentment feels justified. It's in choosing what's right even when no one will ever know." She leaned forward slightly, as if speaking to more than just Michael now, as if speaking to anyone who had ever misunderstood what faith truly was. "And yes," she continued, "people judge. They assume things based on what I wear, how I speak, or where I choose to show up." She tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. "But you know what?" And for the first time since the interview began, Michael had no quick response. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure he had an answer. "I'm not here to convince them of anything," Karoline said, her voice steady. "I'm here to live the truth of what I believe, whether they understand it or not." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Michael sat back, blinking, as if processing the enormity of what had just been said. He had expected something different from her. Anger, maybe, defensiveness, perhaps even a hint of shame or an apology for not meeting his expectations. But instead, he had encountered something rare, someone whose peace was not for sale, someone whose strength did not rely on how others viewed her, someone who had no need to prove anything. For a long moment, Michael didn't speak. The studio was so still that the faint hum of the cameras was the only sound. Karoline sat in the calm after the storm of words, unwavering, her faith a quiet but undeniable force. The interview had changed. The man who had entered this room in control now found himself at a loss. Michael, known for his sharp tongue and relentless questioning, had been certain he could break through, certain he could expose something beneath Karoline's words. But he had miscalculated. Now, he found himself caught in his own assumptions, confronted with something that wasn't just words, but a truth lived. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The energy that had once fueled Michael's attempts to provoke her now felt faint, like an echo of something that no longer held power. Karoline, however, was more grounded than ever. She didn't sit in victory. She didn't sit in defiance. She simply sat, calm, present, and unshaken. A beat passed. Then another. The ticking of the studio clock suddenly felt deafening. Michael cleared his throat, reaching for his stack of notes as if they might offer him a way forward. But there was nothing written there that could fix this moment. He had expected a confrontation, a crack in her composure, a moment where he could seize control. Instead, she had responded with something he hadn't anticipated: clarity, conviction, a strength so resolute that it left no room for doubt. For the first time in a long time, Michael found himself questioning his own approach. He had built a career on exposing hypocrisy, on making people answer for their beliefs and contradictions. But what if there was nothing to expose? What if, for once, he had come up against something that didn't need defending? The camera zoomed in on Karoline. She sat still, unshaken, while Michael scrambled to regain control of the interview. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a subtle unease. He glanced toward the producer, searching for direction. The producer only shrugged. There was nothing left to say. This interview had taken on a life of its own. Karoline's gaze remained on Michael, steady but not unkind. There was no smugness in her expression, no anger, just an undeniable presence, one that made it impossible to look away. She had not won by debating. She had not won by overpowering him. She had won simply by being who she was, and in that moment it became clear to everyone in the room, including Michael, what had really happened. This was no longer a battle of words. It had become a battle of values, and Karoline had already won. The weight in the room slowly shifted, not with finality but with realization. Michael had come here seeking to expose weakness. Instead, he had uncovered strength. Karoline wasn't just a woman of faith. She was a woman who lived her faith, not for the world's approval, not for show. Simply because it was who she was. And in the end, that was more powerful than any challenge, any scrutiny, any doubt. The cameras kept rolling as Michael forced a smile. "Well, Karoline," he said, his voice lacking its usual edge, "I think we've covered everything for today," but the words felt empty now. The interview wasn't ending because of some dramatic conclusion. It was ending because Karoline had said all that needed to be said, and in doing so, she had made him rethink everything. The crew began to pack up. The room started to empty. Karoline stood, her movements unhurried, her expression calm. A quiet smile touched her lips. She hadn't just answered a question. She had shared a piece of herself with the world, and whether they understood it or not, that was enough. It was clear that her message had been heard, not just by Michael, not just by the crew, but by everyone who had witnessed the exchange. And yet for Karoline, this was never about winning. The victory wasn't in silencing Michael or proving a point. It was in living her truth, unmoved by the judgment of others. As the interview wrapped up and the crew began packing away their equipment, the room, once thick with tension, now felt quieter, reverent. Karoline rose from her seat, her posture as steady as when she had entered. The dimming studio lights did nothing to diminish the quiet presence she carried with her. She wasn't walking away from a confrontation. She was walking away from the truth she had simply shared, unwavering and unchanged. As she stepped off sat the producer who had observed from the shadows hesitated before approaching her. For a moment he said nothing. Then finally he spoke, his voice softer, more measured than before. "Karoline," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I've been in this business a long time. I've seen a lot of interviews, but that was different." He exhaled, still processing. "You didn't just stand your ground. You changed the entire dynamic of the conversation." Karoline met his gaze with a small, knowing smile. But there was no pride in it, only quiet acknowledgement. "It wasn't about changing anything," she said simply. "It was about staying true to who I am, no matter how it's received." The producer nodded slowly, her words settling into the silence between them. He had expected an argument, a clash of ideals, a dramatic conclusion that would tie everything up neatly. Instead, he had witnessed something deeper, something that required no theatrics, no grand gestures. Karoline had simply stood, and in her calm, unwavering strength, the message had been delivered. As she left the studio, her steps light, her mind clear, she allowed the weight of the moment to settle into perspective. She had always known the challenge of holding on to her faith in moments like these, when the world demanded answers that fit within its narrow definitions of belief. But she also knew something far more important. Faith was not a performance. It was not something to be proven. It was something to be lived. The lesson was not just for Michael, not just for the crew, but for anyone watching. True strength is not found in what can be seen, measured, or debated. It is found in the moments of silence, in quiet acts of kindness, in the way we live when no one is watching. Faith is not a show. It is a journey of conviction and authenticity. Karoline had proven that even in a world obsessed with outward validation, it is the internal belief that matters most. And when we live from that place of truth, we cannot be shaken by the judgments of others. As the final shot of the interview aired, her message traveled beyond the walls of the studio. It wasn't just about faith, it was about identity, about defining ourselves in a world that constantly tries to define us. It was about standing firm in our convictions, in our truths, and letting our actions speak louder than any symbol or performance ever could. For those who had been moved by her words, the takeaway was simple yet profound. Stand firm in who you are, in what you believe, in how you treat others. Do not let the noise of the world force you to change your core beliefs. Live authentically, unapologetically, and in the end, the world will come to recognize the strength that lies in quiet conviction. Because at the end of the day, it is not the loudest voice that leaves the deepest impact. It is the one that stands firm, unshaken, and that is something worth holding on to, no matter what anyone else says. As the screen faded to black, a final question remained. A question not just for Michael or for the audience, but for everyone watching. How do you live your truth in a world that wants to define it for you?